Ethan, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, man.
I have a lot of questions for you. Just now, you just gave me a brief studio tour, which it was quite helpful to see that because getting a sense of the substance and the structure of your work and the real texture of it is difficult from just images online.
That's an eternal, eternal thing for me, which I mostly don't, I mostly don't like. I like it in theory because I'm a really, part of my interest in especially painting, but art in general and my own work is the kind of physicality of it, right? And the embodiment of viewing, being in front of something and kind of comparing it to the terms of your own reality and your own body. Like that's a big part of my, what, I'm conscious of when I'm making stuff or when I'm looking at things. So one level, it's kind of nice, like almost without fail, when people see my work in person for the first time, they're like, oh, there's this extra element of information they weren't getting. But of course, living in the time we do, it's also a source of frustration because so much just gets mediated, right? And more people, no matter what, will always see the reproduction than the real thing. So there's always this sense of anxiety I have that like, shit, people aren't getting it. How can I convey this better,
I think it's better to go that way than the inverse.
True. I think I heard another one of your podcasts where you use that Ed Ruscha quote about the huh wow versus wow huh.
So good. It's so good. I never gets
So
old.
Ruscha, it's so Ruscha. I'm
So
surprised you
appreciate.
didn't make a painting out of it.
Yeah, you should have.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so good. But I'm really struck by seeing your work right now, and this new work that I'm seeing is it seems like it's you're doing some different things. You were explaining that your process has changed over the last few years.
hmm Yeah.
You're shifting away from getting things fabricated and doing everything in the studio.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess to back up, like it's my like origin story, as I've told it, in a lot of ways, is like I was, I wouldn't want to go any further back than grad school, which is already a long time away at this point. But, in grad school, I was ironically making works with foam, which I'm doing now again. And they were kind of these abstractions that were coming from my experience of being in an urban space, which was pretty new to me. I was mostly raised in pretty deep rural situations in Virginia and North Florida. And so, like, when I moved to New Haven, which felt like a big city at the time, and was taking trips into New York during grad school, yeah, there was a lot of like friction and discomfort, but fascination with this whole different type of density, and this kind of complexity of an urban space. And so I was making these foam abstractions that were coming from that experience, but were like abstracted, in air quotes. And one of the big shifts I had when I graduated and moved to the city was uh, recognizing at least a possibility that, like, oh, these things that I've called reference images, like the photos I'm taking as I'm moving around, they could be the main event. Like if I could find a way to make them compelling enough, i.e., that they would feel like they had the energy of painting and maybe the energy of a lot of commercial stuff I was seeing in the world, whether that's outdoor signage or like, vacuum formed tops of cabs, take your pick. If I could give them some of that like physicality, maybe they could be good enough on their own. Um, and so that was a big flip, that was like a big change that it sort of animated my work for a long time since, it's like, okay, like how can I stick closer to what's getting me excited? How can I make that more explicit? And so, this was also coinciding a lot with a much more widely available set of possibilities for photo, right? This is when like UV printing was becoming more of a thing in the world and iPhones were getting better. And so there was just this kind of moment where I was like, oh shit, like this things are lining up in a way that will allow for a lot more. And so that's what got me into exploring a lot of different types of fabrication and kind of, backdrafting really on more, large scale commercial processes, right? Like UV printing, which, I'd go to my UV printer and they'd be like doing Apple's signage for Midtown Manhattan. They're like, oh shit, okay, we can squeeze you in. It's like constantly the sense that I was like eking in between the spaces of those kind of industries.
So as technology changed, did your work change as well?
To a degree, yeah. But I have to say, like, even when I was like at my techiest, I I always sort of resisted feeling like or feeling like I was doing something progressive. I thought of it much more as doing something that was pedestrian, So I was never self-consciously like seeking out the newest thing. It was much more like what is pretty obviously available, because I think there's some sort of shared legibility between me and the viewer in that case, or at least that's how I thought of it. Like if I know how to do it, the chances are it will at least like feel familiar in some way to people. It'll scratch some sense of recognition, right?
So you didn't need to have an engineering degree to make these.
Yeah, everything I did was pretty simple, honestly. I mean,
Yeah.
I simple in terms of like the tools, maybe, we're not, nothing was like top secret or unavailable. And in fact, that wasn't an appealing idea. I like to think that I was finding novel ways of fitting the pieces together. It's like, for instance, I did a body of work where I would take a photo and make a CNC carving from the photo based on the lights and darks of that photo, and then print the photo back on top of it. So you'd have like this topography that was layered with the color of the photo, right? And I hadn't seen anyone else do that before. I don't know if I don't know that I don't think I probably did invent it, but I hadn't seen quite that combo in art before. So I was always looking for things like that, like things that would be a tweak on some pre-existing ways of working.
I was doing a thought experiment, thinking about your work in the context of being so urban and being really connected to an urban environment. I wonder what kind of work you'd make if you lived in the country, you know?
hmm I do too. I do too. I mean, I when I say I grew up rural, it went from one extreme to another. I mean, really early, it was like true country. Like we were in a kind of hippie commune living on a mountain in Virginia, no running water, no electricity. Um, but high school was like dirty South Florida, like North Florida. And in a way, I could still work there. I can imagine it because there are all these funny, weird intersections of like the natural world and like a shell gas station,
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
that kind of thing always gets me going, these kind of
Yeah.
like weird mutant situations. So I think I would need something a little either grotesque or incongruent, but as long as I have that, I'm good.
You have a real way of elevating, I think that's the right way to put it, your environment. You're seeing, you showed me a piece in the brief studio tour before we started of one of the latest pieces you've made of, it was like a coupon book that was torn up, and but you really made it this beautiful thing where normally you step over those 20 times a day, and they're all over the road, and you don't think twice about it. But if you really look at it, you can really consider, and I get a sense that you're really inviting people to maybe look more closely at their environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's like an underlying belief that, yeah, I mean, an underlying belief, I guess, that like everything is interesting with the right quality of attention. Um, and that like that is a firm bedrock for a project, like so far so good, at least where that I've been able to return to things I'm encountering, and specifically things I'm encountering in shared space, things I'm encountering out in the world that are sort of public spaces that in theory anyone could move through. Um, that's been like a wellspring, and it does sometimes feel like not enough or too much. And, but the challenge and the reward is like trying to maintain a certain quality of attention that reveals what's fascinating and weird and, anthropologically rich about those environments.
You're transmuting it. You're not just simply referencing the environment or using, I can't quite tell, what medium it is. There's painting and there's sculpture and there's photographic stuff and there's all this other stuff going on. If you were just using photography or something and sort of showing me this, there's more, I guess what I'm saying is there's more texture to it, right? You're almost recreating the
Yeah.
thing, but in a different, at a like seen at a different angle or something.
Yeah, I'm glad you make that distinction. And I think that, yeah, that's pretty important. I mean, there's a few thoughts I have with that. I mean, one is like there's a reason why I never made straight photography. And in some ways I still don't really consider myself a photographer at all. I think of myself as maybe like if I wanted to find a label like a printmaker slash painter, there's a lot of matrices and, and sort of templates through which the work passes through, which I associate very much with printmaking. It's a kind of sculptural image making. So that's one quality that, I always wanted images that had like I'm trying to think of the right term, but the duality of painting, and that it's an object and it's an image at the same time, that it's sort of, to me, that's like one of the main, you know terms that painting has, and it keeps, reinventing why that's interesting in different time periods, but the sort of thingness of it alongside the kind of like transcendent or optical qualities of it, right? You look into it. It's a window you look into, but it's also a door because you can see how thick it is and you can kind of see it's a thing, it's not, and so that was always, and I think that's part of what you're speaking to, is there's a way of remaking these images that doesn't simply try to get it right, but interjects touch and texture and all sorts of more expressive elements or tactile elements. And I think that's one reason. And the other probably goes back to this abstract painting impulse I have. The appeal of abstraction is the suspension of possibilities for me. It's the way that it holds contradictions, that it again is maybe just a dumb pattern, or also maybe it's like a map of the cosmos, or it's like maybe it has gravity, or maybe it's floating. When things are, abstract in the sense that they don't resolve into a single image, that's what's interesting, I think, as they sort of float between possibilities. If they're done right, they're not chaotic. It's not like whatever. It could be anything, but it suspends a few possibilities in motion. It's like juggling, right? And you get going fast enough, it looks like a ring, but it's made of separate balls. So all of which is to say, I don't know if I've gone too abstract in saying that, but i.e., like I want them to, like, yes, trigger some recognition. So I'm taking, we don't have images here in this, obviously, but I'm taking pictures of signage. I'm taking pictures of markings on the ground, of infrastructural panels. And I want there to be enough of that there that it triggers familiarity, but also, yeah, they're transformed in some way or juxtaposed with other elements so that it sort of is its own thing. It's not just a faithful recreation.
You did mention that you liked the ambiguity of the medium. We're not quite sure if it's painting, but it is painting, but it's sculpture, but it's neither. That sort of hovers in this spot, which kind of makes me recall this conversation I had with Jonathan. Do you know the painter Jonathan Almayer?
Hmm.
We got into a discussion about object versus image. What's the difference between an object and an image? And we came to this. He really sees paintings as being like living things or having this a real sense of agency, which I think is I get that sense in your work looking at them. They do have a kind of a living quality. They feel alive in a sense. I think
What
that
would be what would you contrast with that? Like
image
what's an image that doesn't feel alive?
online, a flat image on a computer screen,
Okay.
versus an actual painting in space, an object in space.
Hmm.
Maybe you're sort of being sucked into this kind of space, but then
Hmm.
it's clearly an object. There's a real nice space in between when I look at your work where I'm like, I'm not sure. I like can transport myself into this zone, but I have to confront the materiality of it.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's good to hear. That's certainly an experience I enjoy too. Probably, very much an experience of our collective education, right? Of a
Mm.
certain, it's probably something that's always there, but it's an experience that's emphasized, I think, from a certain generational perspective, right? It's like all our teachers, I imagine, were like, you know, uh, educated in like post abstract expressionist New York, or or many of them were, at least, there's a certain residue of that value, of really the kind of physicality and the illusion. I don't know how much that's, yeah. Anyways, I don't really have a point so much as I'm aware of that. Maybe I think why I even mentioned that is I feel like I've been aware of that maybe is a value that is also bounded, like every other, like most other values, at least in time, that you talk to a 20-year-old artist and they might not be excited by those kind of possibilities. I don't know.
What are they excited about?
You'd have to ask them.
I'm really curious.
I could speculate, but I would probably just be embarrassing myself. I don't
No,
want
no,
to.
we should speculate.
I mean, you see lots of different things. I actually do see a lot of resurgence. I mean, the 90s have been hot for a long, long time. I also
Yeah.
teach, and some of the more interesting conversations I've had with students of mine who weren't alive in the 90s is why they still, or they weren't there, why they have such an interest in it, and their answer, the simple answer is like a nostalgia, which is funny because they weren't there, but it's a projected nostalgia. They said things like, that's a time when we weren't surveilled, and you could go out and your
Ah.
parents didn't know where you were, or your friends didn't know where you were. So anyways, uh, I of course like hearing that because it's like, oh shit, like it's coming around again. There's some sort of yeah, I guess, I feel like 5 years ago you might have said like, oh, it's all digital. But now I increasingly feel like I run into people in their 20s who are like, fuck the internet in one form or another. And I find that really healthy and encouraging, you know, like,
It's great to hear. Yeah.
yeah, I know I'm collecting evidence for it. I have no idea how true it is, but I remember every example.
You're teaching art students, so they're probably a little, maybe a slight, maybe some outliers there.
Yep. But if you know if the way it usually works is any guide, they're just a little ahead of the curve, right?
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. They're paving the way. Hopefully it's the same way that we see smoking and increasingly things like sugar, refined sugar. Young people reject it more. And I'm sure they're going to look at the internet and the way we use it now and just be utterly horrified at what it's actually doing to our brains and our bodies, and everything.
I mean, yeah, my sense is this will be a good podcast to listen back and see how the predictions age. But my optimistic take is that like millennials were sort of peak alienation in the sense of like the embrace of like I am an online brand, like you know, like I'm
Yeah.
going to become a content creator, and that's an exciting direction to go in. I don't know that I don't know. It's hard to imagine a world where we're free of that, but my hopeful sense is that no longer seems cool. You know,
Did you see the movie Triangle of Sadness?
I did, yeah.
That to me was just such a great social commentary, just a very astute look at perhaps some of the deeper the unhappiness that's in the. I think they were supposed to be millennials, I think, right?
Oh, I didn't think about that.
In their 20s or 30s, whatever it was.
It was a mixed range. That's the one where they crashed the boat, right?
Yeah, they crashed the
Yeah.
boat. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that struck me as a very like, you know, tongue-in-cheek Marxist movie or
Or I
something.
guess they blow up the boat.
Yeah,
Somebody
right.
blows up the boat. Yeah.
Right. The takeaway was I mean the takeaway yeah I don't know that's a whole other topic I have no expertise in but like to comment on it meaningfully but like yeah I took it as like sort of funny slash cynical about how power works you know that
Yeah.
the woman with the lowest social position became the dominatrix on the because she had all the
Yeah, because
survival
she could
skills.
catch the fish. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's
And
amazing.
she ended up doing the same thing that anyone seems to do, which is like take the most attractive young mates and hoard resources.
I feel like I've gone too far. I've gone
We're
too
entering
far.
into a separate
I've,
podcast
I've gone off
territory.
the rails. I'm sorry. Yeah,
It's all right.
there'll be some editing involved here. I should ask, how much do you notice? How much do you think you notice more than the average person? Because when I look at your work, I'm like, oh yeah, I never really noticed that. But that is when you're walking around, when you're just, do you make an effort to actually, do you go out into the world with the intent to sort of capture some of this stuff, or do you just happen to notice something when you're walking about?
More the latter, yeah. And I don't, you know, and to answer your question, I bet I don't notice more than the average person at all. I just maybe notice different things, right? It all depends on where your attention's trained.
You've been doing this consistently for long enough that I think you probably know what you're interested in, or what if something is different or something's interesting to you, then it'll stand out. Then you'll probably know right away, right?
Yeah, usually. I mean, it's I do think of it as a sort of world building, which is funny because I'm pulling from a world that already exists, but I'm sort of building I almost think of it as building an alternate version of it, you know? Like that's why like to me, the more work, the better. I remember going into like older artist studios when I was a student and seeing all the work, and it was a similar sensation. Like, oh, they have. There's enough of this that it's like a world. You know, it's like a worldview. And in my case, because it's from the world, it's almost more literal. But to your point, like, yes, I know what interests me, but also I think I'm always looking to like expand the boundaries a little bit. You know, like, oh, is there a way I can work with this type of imagery or subject matter that I hadn't considered yet? You know, like so like for instance, recently I've started using more language and signage, and I've also started using like I'm just starting and I want to see if I can push more into like imagery of architectural renderings on those green construction fences, right? Because there's all this illusionism, both literally because they're making a building usually, but also like projection, right? We see these like art, you know, architects' renderings of what's coming next. And it's like this weird literal green screen with this green fence surrounding nothing except a little image of what's coming next on it, right? You know, and like that's a really funny situation of like the diagram before the thing, you know, and the diagrams are sometimes really shitty and look like some, you know, junior member banged it out on like SketchUp, and sometimes they're like incredibly detailed. I showed you one just now where like they literally put a little Anish Kapoor bean in there, and they're probably going to get a bean. You know what I mean? That's probably contractually. Well, either way, I have no idea. It's funny if they stole the bean or if they know they're getting a bean. But you know, like so it's like this. Yeah, it's they're just interesting to me, right? Because they're these projections of the future with various degrees of fidelity, but they're also hung in a public space, and people inevitably like fuck with them and draw on them or you know rip pieces off. All of which is to say, like these are things that have just recently come on my radar where I'm like, wait a minute, like that's a really rich subject. Like I've been walking by these forever and kind of didn't quite catch that it could be part of the work. And so those are exciting moments where it feels like there are these moments of unlock where you see possibilities for a subject you hadn't seen before.
I really enjoyed that one in particular because I feel like it's a representation of a representation. There's like a lot of layers. I mean, there
Mm.
is anyway, but that one specifically having an architectural space and it's a flat but not quite flat rendition of a flat rendering. They're like layers and layers of it.
Yeah.
And I like what you said also about these. Could you talk about them being sort of capitalist projections?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean they quite literally are, right? They're I mean this one, especially the one you saw, is like some, wannabe Apple store coming to Chelsea. And it feels like, yeah, it almost feels like a parody, but it's not. It's a pure, but it's like, yeah, it's a capitalist projection in a few senses, but the most literal is like, this is what we think it's going to look like. This is like if you throw enough money at it, you get this. But there's something about that is like immediately shabby in the context it's presented, right? You've taken this thing that was no doubt presented at some like board meeting and you put it in public space, and the absurdity of it suddenly is higher. And I like it also, that I've also been working with like imagery of the cash for cars signs. And to me, they're like on this spectrum of like economic desperation and economic disruption. I don't know, I sort of tread lightly because I don't know that I'm trying to explicitly articulate, a point so much as I feel like a little bit of a cultural anthropologist, collecting like evidence of like this stratum of like economic come-ons, right? Like there's a whole different audience for that being architecture projection and the cash for cars sign, but they're both these different strategies for like trying to get money out of people. And where and just sort of stating the terms in ways that are both like banal and fantastical. And so I just find them to be like intrinsically really strange and like, and like, yeah, they're like imaginative portals too, like in both cases, I wonder what's behind it. I wonder, who's running it, where's, what happens next. Um,
There's an ambivalence there too. Like who are these people? Who are the people that are putting these signs up? Who are the people that are benefiting from the signs? Who are they targeting? All through your work, there's a really interesting, playful ambivalence. Just as you said, you're not really going for a heavy critique necessarily. I get a sense there's an attempt to look at these things somewhat objectively.
Yeah, and maybe if there's any opinions, quote unquote, it's in the making, which again is a little open, but is nonetheless intuitive, and intuitive response to these images and how I represent them, as you said, and how how much I interrupt them or amplify certain elements. And I'm sort of just having to, at this stage, because it's new enough imagery, I'm sort of just trusting that the making process will be be its own reality in a way that maybe lets helps me let go of more dichotomous thinking about it, or more more or maybe more like linear thinking about it, like, oh, I have, because I think I have, like, i.e. I have to have a viewpoint or a clear critique. I'm sort of trusting in the making, and that will be the ambivalence maybe that you expressed, you were saying, but yeah, it's something I struggle to talk about it because it's hard to talk about. But that's why I'm making it. You know what I mean? The making is a way, and with all the work, the making is a way of spending time with something I find confusing, ambivalent, disturbing, exciting, and the making is a way to process that.
I mean, we're living in a very strange world. It's
Yes,
truly bizarre.
always.
You're really grappling with that. Like you're going into your environment and you're observing these things, which normally one would take for granted. But if you really look close enough, that like it's pretty weird out there and interesting and very interesting, both conceptually, aesthetically. And I think there is an ambivalence in general to it also. Like people, we tend to want to have strong opinions one way or the other about many things, right?
Yeah.
About aesthetics, about politics, about the city. I think a lot of people they move to New York City and I hate the city. It's a terrible place, and that's all just a subjective thing. Everything. I'm not saying there's any moral. I'm not making a case for moral relativism at all. But there's a lot of nuance in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the fact that I'm even articulating what I am is probably a reflection of that expectation, right? That if you have a subject matter, there is an implicit critique or there is a statement behind it, right? That's sort of, again, maybe a way we've been conditioned and trained. Um, yeah, and I think an important part of being an artist for me is retaining a more open-ended relationship to subject matter.
And also, I like that you can't quite say what it's doing.
Well, that's the energy. Yeah, that's the energy that generates it too. Is sort of being as open as possible and seeing seeing what arises as you're moving around in the world.
Yeah. So how much have you been influenced by historical painting, historic art historically, and what has been influential for you?
Yeah. Short answer is a lot, I think primarily it's been artists of the 20th and 21st century. I really enjoy earlier stuff, but in terms of thinking of any direct connection, the farthest back I could go is someone like Cezanne, maybe, speaking of a world builder that's also like a materialist, but like people like Richard Archschwager have been a big influence on me, these sort of hybrid makers, where they sort of combine a lot of what we're talking about, this world of like design and sculpture and painting. Um, Robert Gober, someone I thought about. I mean, a lot of times it's interesting. People I like, my work looks nothing like, but they've influenced my thinking. Rachel Harrison was someone I thought a lot about, especially in grad school. Um, Jasper Johns, big one for me. Maybe Philip Guston is my favorite, although that's maybe not the most obvious either. But there, I won't unpack all them, but I could find a connection to each of them. I think probably what they all have in common certainly is like mixing languages, right, in one form or another, like i.e. the language of cartooning and abstract painting in the case of Guston. Or with Rachel Harrison, it's very obvious, right? The way she brings together photo and sculpture and kind of a big range of cultural associations and this kind of like precarious balance.
That's good. That's good. I recently talked with the painter Robert Feintuch for the podcast. I haven't released it yet, but he was talking about Cézanne
Mhm.
and in the context of it being very, very much about not being sure.
Yeah.
I never thought of it that way, but there is a real sense of he's really you can see him working it out every
Oh,
time. He's
yeah.
really working it out.
Those paintings are really intense in a way that I think is not talked about very often. And they're very like philosophical too. But like I did some studies from them when I was a student, where I tried to like, roughly recreate them. And they're like these crumbling worlds, you realize that like everything is attached to everything else. There are no concrete edges. It's very much like a Buddhist slash, metaphysical perspective. They're totally these unstable worlds where like everything is rippling and interconnected and yeah, they're really intense. Like no, there are no moments of pause in the paintings at least. His watercolors are different. Those are kind of they have more like breathing room, but most of the paintings do not.
It's amazing also thinking about those from just in the context of the time. It was like Cézanne versus Bouguereau. Right? It's
Uh-huh.
like who's gonna look at the time, but people didn't know. People really thought that it was like one or the other. It was like the Atelier school and the French, these.
I don't think it was a contest at the time. I think clearly Bouguereau. Yeah. Have you read The Judgment of Paris?
No.
It's a book about exactly that. It juxtaposes Manet and Bouguereau more. Um,
Interesting.
but basically, yeah, I mean, I'm no art historian, but having read that book and a few other things here and there, the impression it gives, it was like Bouguereau was the man. Manet was like this weirdo that like a few people knew what was up, and it was very clear that he was the dominant figure in his own time.
He was very secretive about mediums and materials and things
Uh-huh.
like that. And whenever I encounter an artist who's secretive about what they're doing, I think about him and I keep it to myself. I don't say, you remind me of this you remind me of Boogaloo. But
That's funny. What do you so you judge so you I guess you've already answered the question. I was gonna say you have a negative connotation to people that are overly secretive about process.
well, I do have a bit of an I try to be open-minded in all things. I do try. Nobody's completely successful in that because we all have our worldview, of course. But if if somebody were to ask me what I was using or what I was doing, want to share, just like, hey, who can I be here, like you should use it. It's for sharing, nobody's gonna, I guarantee if somebody wants to try and make your work and sell it, that'd be amazing if they could do that. I think it should be something that you should, I guess. I mean, I don't know why anybody would want to like recreate your work in the first place, but the whole thing. I mean, I've just learned so much from people I've benefited so much from the generosity of not just formal teachers, but people out there. You learn this trick and that trick, and they tell you this, and it seems like the just small, like basic little small things, not master formulas for mediums. And most of the stuff you figure out on your own, but just little tricks and tips that help you. And I get a sense in your work you're really using a lot of skills. Maybe you could walk me through the process a little of making a piece.
Yeah, well, I mean, the pieces that I showed you, they're all based in the substrate is foam. So I'm hand carving foam, and that includes hot wire cutting, that includes using a router, kind of anything, any tool is fair game, but it's uh that's both like the surface and the support, these sheets of foam. And basically I often begin with like a sketch, and then there's a process of like um, well, covering them in resin, and then a sort of open-ended back and forth with image transfers and painting and further cutting. So it's not linear where it can be like it always goes this way. But I think what's kind of crucial is at least with this body work has been those elements of like a substrate that is also like uh intimately bound up with the subject, or the surface rather, right? There's no, I guess, I'm juxtaposing that with like, I'm not sticking something on a canvas. In fact, I did a few early attempts with this body of work where I stuck the foam on the canvas and realized that was totally unnecessary. That what was interesting, the spaces I'm making, by the way, are generally like the spaces I'm depicting are generally very shallow, right? They're like close-ups of surfaces, or things that are maybe an inch or two deep at most. And I like the fact that the foam is also the same dimension. So there's like this literal and optical space that aligns, right? And that works nicely because if I'm carving into it, it's sort of articulating that further. You've got an image of something that's an inch thick, and I will carve in that full inch or half inch. And so it sort of is really actively part of the image you're seeing. And that's important that it's sort of that the foam can be both like very flexible and kind of almost like clay, but then it can also be hardened and fixed into position. I can at the end I usually mount the foam onto some sort of board just to hold everything together. But I don't know how much that gives you an image of what's going on, but it's basically like these sculptural surfaces that I'm combining photographs and painting on, and they're often layered in a way that I think makes it confusing in terms of what's what. The things that are painted versus photographic are often intertwined, and it's hard to tell which is which. In some cases, they're substituted for the other, where there'll be pure painterly passages next to photographic passages. But the idea of kind of not having a clear linear sequence is important to me. That it's not just like, I think a lot of unsuccessful painting sculpture or painting photo hybrids have a clear linear sequence, and that's why they're unsuccessful in many cases, where it's like I have this photo and you can see the paint I added on top of it, right? And if it's just that one too, I think I have to think about why. That's a whole separate topic, why, but I think it often doesn't feel as compelling. So I like the idea that there's a real interwoven quality to all those steps.
I wonder if a part of that is that it takes out some of the fun in making it. If you know exactly how the process is going to go, it seems like you often maybe don't know, and it kind of maybe it adds an element of excitement
I
and
think that's right.
discovery.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I think I guess it's a sweet spot for everybody how much you need to know to get started, right? But yeah, like I like to have just enough to get started, and then I think you're right. There's some degree of it's important that things can go off the rails a little bit, right? I like repair is a big part in my work, like meaning that like, something will get screwed up and I'll have to like sand it down and patch it up and or maybe cut a piece out or add a new piece. And that's like, yeah, that's like emotionally, I mean, I use the word repair in an almost therapeutic sense, right? There's something emotionally healing about fixing something gone wrong. It's a process you go through and it feels like fixing a wound. But it also, I think, factors into how these things look. You can see that they're built, that they're kind of put together in a way that is an accumulation of moves, not a simple formula played out.
And it might change something, right? If you make a air quotes mistake, then when you bring it back, it could alter. I guess it would alter the piece.
Yeah,
going
absolutely.
forward.
And sometimes you're fucked, but usually, overwhelmingly, the mistakes, of course, they lead you to a place where you've got nothing left to lose. So you try something you might not have, and that's where you get, that's how you push things along.
Yes, some healthy desperation.
Yes. Totally.
It's the
Totally.
best.
Yeah, I guess desperation that forces you to keep acting is, at least I don't know if it's always healthy, but it's better odds as
Yeah,
opposed to desperation that shuts you down.
it is. It is. It's like
Yeah.
that. I don't quote Mao Zedong very often, but he said that when there's chaos, when there's great chaos under heaven, the situation is fine.
It's like chaos is a ladder from Game of Thrones.
Is that what they said? I
You
don't
don't know,
remember.
yeah, that's
Uh,
funny. The writers must have been quoting, playing with the Mao quote. Yeah, there's this line, chaos is a ladder. One of the characters in Games of Thrones
that's
famously
good.
said that. Yeah.
I read the books,
Oh,
which
really?
I almost couldn't read it because I had read some of the. I was reading something like some classics, like I think I'd read the Odyssey or something before, and then tried to read that. It's everything is contextual though. Like it really everything I tried to read. I read last year. I read War and Peace for the first time, and there's a reason why people talk about that book. It's
It's a
there's a
banger.
it truly I it's just astounding. You're just utterly transported into that world. But everything I read after it, I was like, this is trash. You
Right.
know, even it was
Yeah,
like
that's
pretty.
funny.
Yeah,
You got to take a break from something really good.
yeah,
That's interesting. Or, I guess, well, I mean, that's where contemporary literature is just like contemporary art. I try to read a decent amount of contemporary literature, and most of it's disappointing,
yeah.
but I'm like, that's the game. It's hard to do something good. And if you're reading it in real time, the odds of failure, even among the really talented, is going to be high.
Think of the contemporary literature that you'll never read through the ages from ages past. That
Yeah.
just didn't make the cut historically. Why certain things made it and why other things didn't.
That's a whole world, isn't it? I mean, you see that in the art world all the time. I mean, I always think how like how great that is for dealers. There's an endless supply of good enough artists who didn't get famous enough in their lifetime. There's just like warehouse after warehouse of like pretty good painters who didn't get famous. They can revamp. Uh,
It's true, and you wonder about art. And looking back, I guess I wonder. I think we're roughly the same age, and if you look back the 2000s, the teens, the 20 teens, you kind of get a sense of what was popular at the time. And at the time, I remember just thinking certain things were really cool, like certain kind of abstract paintings, and then it became figurative painting. Like you can see these trends.
mhm.
I think probably maybe because of how rapid the culture is now, but you see them come and go quite quickly.
Yeah.
And what stays, what makes it, it's interesting to look back.
It's never a closed case either. When I was working for David Reed a long time ago, he was organizing the High Times, Hard Times show. I don't know if you know about that one. It was in the National Academy here in New York, and it toured around a bit. But I mean, this is a long time ago. I want to say this was like, I want to say 2006, 2000, somewhere around there. And among many of artists in there was Jack Whitten, who I'd never heard of. And Jack Whitten was one of David Reed's heroes, who was 10 years older than him or something. And Jack Whitten is now Jack Whitten, but like perfect example. I mean, he was always a great painter. Everyone kind of knew it, to a degree, but he was underrated or forgotten to a degree. I don't know. Again, I'm careful with my words here. I'm sure people who knew what was what kind of always knew, but he wasn't getting museum retrospectives left and
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Um, Perfect example. Totally a good slash great painter. The narratives didn't align. You could call it, racism in his case. I'm sure there was some element of just like,
Yeah.
I remember talking to an artist who I won't name because I appreciate his honesty, but he was like, he was sort of David's generation. And he was like, I remember all those painters. And at the time, it was like, yeah, they're pretty good, but they weren't like the main guys. You didn't take them as seriously. And now it's like, what the fuck were we thinking? Like these artists were obviously as good. And I think there's versions of that happening all the time, where the context changes, the narrative changes. And I think a lot of artists are good enough to be that artist. You know what I mean? There's always going to be a surplus.
That's the great thing about it, about being a visual artist, or I guess any artist. Back in 2018, I was freelancing for Karma, and they picked up Paul Mogensen. I don't know if you know who he is.
Not
He
sure if
still shows with them. He's in his 80s now, so still painting, still making awesome paintings, but he was pretty well known. He showed at the Bikert Gallery. Do you know
what
they
was gallery?
the Bikert Gallery?
I don't know if I do
It
now.
was run by this guy Klaus Curtis back in the late
I've heard of Klaus
60s.
Curtis. Yeah.
Yeah, he ran it. So Bryce Martin got to start there. Linda Benglis, David Novros, Dorothea Rockburn, and a bunch of other people sort of got their start at this gallery, and he did too. And he was pretty well known in the art world, and then kind of fell off the radar of a lot of people for decades. for a
Hmm.
decade. And then I think it was 2018 that Karma sort of rediscovered him and brought him back, and then he became known again. But it's funny the way that I remember looking. We took all of his stuff. I was doing some art handling for the gallery, and we took all the stuff from his storage space to photograph it, and it was like decades and decades of stuff. And it was like hundreds and hundreds of paintings that were just sitting in like deep storage in this like bunker in New Jersey for years. But it's cool the way this stuff can come back.
It is, I mean, I have very mixed feelings about these stories, you know what I mean? Like, because for obvious reasons, at one level, it's like
Yeah.
cool. It's also just, to me, it makes naked the great power disparities in our
Yeah, I
situation. You know,
know.
it's like there's all
Yeah.
these, good
Yeah.
artists with just, and it also like keeps alive the like, maybe it'll happen to me, like
Yeah.
I'll be
Yeah.
rediscovered. So yeah, I have very mixed feelings. Like at
Yeah.
one level, like, of course, I'm always happy for any good artist who gets their due, But it also like, yeah, it reminds me of um, how great the inequities in this are and sort of how like structurally ridiculous the whole thing is, that there's always going to
Just a
be
few people at the top holding the
yeah,
keys.
there's only
Yeah.
ever supply and demand for a few people at the top, and they can change those few people out. I mean, the thought experiment joke I remember making a while back is like, picture an airplane full of the 100 most sellable popular artists in the world that crashes. That would be like the best thing that could happen to all these dealers, because A, they now have estates for all these artists who are no longer around, and B, they can fill up an airplane with the next 100 artists.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and it does. And I talk about this often with close friends that there seems to be like there's got to be a better system. And I thought the NFT thing was really, I know there's a lot of problems with that, and I know there was a lot of questionable stuff happening there in that space, but the idea there was some start of some different system that gave more power to artists and gave more power not just to artists but to collectors and encouraged a different kind of collecting. And I think there was something there, and the model itself is extremely lopsided. I also recall the Gertrude Stein quote. She says that there's no there there. You think, oh, well, maybe one day I'll make it. They'll discover me. That's not even the point at all. If you're doing all this in hopes that one day you'll be rich and famous, you're probably in the wrong game.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't advocate that as a motivating principle, but good luck like killing the hope in your mind nonetheless, right? Like everyone
I
carries
know.
that around, but yes,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
should not be the reason you get in the studio, I don't think.
Yeah, no, not at all. But you do have to be honest with yourself that we all want to share too, and I think that's a
Sure.
good thing, to
Yeah,
share, and it'd be
sure.
everybody wants to be celebrated.
Well, we all operate in the world we're born into, right? And so the terms of what you're, told you should aspire to inevitably, are hard to ignore. They play a role, especially when you're younger, right? Like so yeah, like what you just said is lovely and true. Like we want to share. People have always made stuff and they've always wanted to share it in one context or another. But we're in a world where yeah, like the terms are very again explicitly capitalist and kind of winner take all and et cetera, et cetera. So I think you can actively work against that. I know a lot of artists that do, both psychologically or materially, like Charlotte Posenensky.
No.
She's an amazing, I mean, she's just the most example that springs to mind. She's dead now, but really great artist who set up a system where her work could only be sold a certain percentage above the production cost. So they're endless multiples. They're really great. I need to buy one. I keep thinking about it. But so you can get a Charlotte Posenensky who's had retrospectives at Dia Beacon for like less than $10,000. Which is not cheap, but she built in a way to keep them from playing the usual game.
How does she prevent people from reselling them, from flipping them?
I don't know. It's a good question. And I don't know the answer. I don't know. I haven't looked deeply into it. I just know that was the setup she arranged with her estate. Um, the answer, if it's working, the answer is probably because they're an unlimited series. So why would you buy it from a flipper when you can just buy a new one from the unlimited series for
Ah,
$8,000? You know?
wow, that's good.
Uh,
That was almost like pre-NFT type
Yeah, in
thinking.
a way it was. It was, yeah. So, anyways, I mean, I always thought that was an interesting example of somebody like aware of the context and actively trying to change it, as opposed to just kind of going along with it. But yeah, I mean, I just think I don't really have a point so much as to say like inevitably we're conditioned by our time and place, and so that those fantasies, even if you can let go your hold on them. They exist and they're sort of always floating around. And they're what other people are at least projecting onto you, even if you've let go of it yourself.
That's a great point. And we're all part of the culture, which if you're in a culture, you're going to participate on a consciousness level, just inevitably. You're a product and a consumer of that culture. I guess you can try to go off the grid and you can try to do various things, but you've been brought up in this culture. You're especially if you're living here in New York City. Again, there's like so much nuance there. It's not all bad. If you look at the just the quality, the energy, the quality, there's so many amazing artists here that are really going for it on an energetic level. It's really inspiring.
Absolutely. Well, that's the kind of thing, me tries to ground myself in as much as possible. Exactly what you just described. The energy of making, the energy of sharing it with people, the energy of seeing other people do it. There is something about that that is like super life affirming.
It is.
You
Yeah. And
know?
just even having this conversation today, I'm struck by seeing the new work you've got going. I can feel the energy of it and just the care that you're putting into it and the consideration, and all this stuff. You can tap into those good qualities of it. I think there's so many ways to look at the same thing. You could be here and be in a state of, do you know like this? Have you heard of the six realms of existence in Buddhism? Like there's
I've heard of it, yeah, but I couldn't name them.
the hungry ghost realm, the human realm, the animal realm, the jealous god realm, the god realm, and the hell realm. And it's really a choice what realm, like how
Mhm.
you want to look at things. And
Yeah,
I think so many of us are stuck in the jealous god realm in the art world. You can do whatever you want. You can make whatever you want. If you're an artist in New York, you're at a very lucky, a very privileged level.
right.
I guess it's all around the culture, not just for artists, but there's the sense of FOMO or a
Mhm.
feeling of, oh, I want to have that show or whatever it is. But it's just a privilege to be here and to be able to contribute in whatever way that you are. I mean, just being here is an active contribution, really.
Yeah. No, that's lovely how you put that. I like that a lot. Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a choice and a practice, at least speaking personally, meaning that it's not just like a switch that's flipped. It's a, whatever practice means for, you or me, but like
Yeah.
for me to ground myself in those things, to not be a hungry ghost or a jealous God, as you say, is like, yeah, you have certain practices, and yeah. But it's total, and making art is one of those, the very best practices for that, like really being into a creative process, is one of the best ways to, yeah, expand beyond those like much more limited, scared terms, right? I feel like those are fear-based states of being, and I think to make art requires you to at least move within fear, you know, move through fear. And
Yeah,
so it's
that's a great way to put it. I really enjoy that. So what do you have coming up?
well, my wife, and I are working on a two-person show for Galerie, which is her gallery in Millerton, New York. That's sort of focused on right now. That's going to be in October. And it's interesting, Son and we've never directly collaborated, and we're going to maybe do, hopefully, we're working on one collaborative project for the show, but it's mostly just going to be our work together, and it's going to come down to the selection of works and the install. And really, it was something proposed by the gallery, which I thought was interesting. That it's run by the Gearys, who are a couple we really like, really lovely people. And yeah, Dolly just proposed it, and I think it struck me as an intuitive thing on her part that seemed kind of right. And that's been my experience of it so far, where we're just like putting our work together in the studio and just kind of letting it hang out. And it's like no sort of hopefully nothing obvious and annoyingly connected, but there are a lot of interesting affinities in terms of like everyday objects and materials, a real emphasis on process and shape making and kind of a um yeah, sort of a need for touch and the hand built. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it works out. But it's been fun to plan that with her, and that includes things like planning the design of it. Like I want to do something in the window. Like I think we'll see if this changes, but something like a grid of imagery related to our process. So sort of almost like an Instagram feed of our processes in the window of the gallery, and things like that, just to kind of unpack things visually as much as anything else. So yeah, so working on that, thinking about that install. I need to make a little model for that. Um, that's the main one I got right now.
That's exciting. You're teaching as well, right?
I am, yeah. I teach at Bergen Community College. And I do some stuff with Columbia every year. That's just more of a one-off, but that's always fun. I take Columbia journalism students around Chelsea and kind of show them art.
Oh, cool. So how much does teaching inform your practice?
I mean, it's an interesting question because my knee-jerk reaction is not a lot, honestly, which is not a bad thing. But probably indirectly a lot and more like you might say energetic ways or emotional ways. Like I definitely feel like teaching is nice for a number of reasons. I mean, I like that I'm at a community college that's incredibly metropolitan. It's very, very diverse in terms of like nationality, and so that I think that keeps it. It gives it, I think, more ambition and interest than your maybe cliched community college, which is a fixed community. This is in New Jersey, in Bergen County, which is yeah has a real range of people. But I like that I'm doing something that's affordable for the students. I think that feels good, and I'm working with a lot of students who are transferring to more expensive schools maybe for the last 2 years. So I like that I'm sort of doing something valuable for them and their families, or at least part of that process. I mean, teaching certainly is a good bullshit detector. I like it for that. Like if I find myself struggling to stand behind an idea or to say it simply, it's very evident very quickly, and I think that's a great thing. And it's also just like at its best, uh, an empathetic and community-based activity, right? Like you spend so much time in your studio. Uh, on the good days, which there are many, it's like, oh, I'm here not to be their friend, which by the way, I wanted to be when I first started. I was like, I want them to like me. I want them to be their friend. And I was like, wait a minute, like I need to be the best thing I can do for all of us is to be valuable to them, like to be of use to them, and I don't have kids, but I think it's sort of analogous to parenting where you're like, you don't want to be your kid's friend. You want to help your kid, succeed in the world. And that sometimes requires you to like not be liked by them or to make them do something uncomfortable, but you're doing it out of that place of care or out of that place of trying to provide real utility, And so that's also valuable as a kind of regular experience, like as a gut check, like, am I doing this for my own comfort or for benefit of them, And that's always a dance, but it's a good dance.
That's really good. That seems valuable for you too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's totally valuable. I just don't, I would struggle to be like, and that's how it relates to my art. It's not. I guess the most obvious way it relates to studio practice is that I definitely try to design projects I would want to do. And I tell them that I'm like, guys, I don't know if you're gonna like this. Like, I'm making my best effort to give you something that I can give you with a straight face because I think it would be cool. Like if you don't like it, understandable. Try to make it interesting for yourself. That's part of the challenge. Like, can you flip this around? Can you jujitsu this in some way that it becomes interesting? But like my best intention is to at least give that a shot. Something that I think would be valuable or interesting.
That's
Um,
good. That's
yeah,
good. I
so
appreciate
so there are definitely things I'll be doing in the studio where I'm like, oh, that would be fun for them to try. Let's try mixing these two mediums, or like let's do a collage and then feed it through the printer. And I have developed at least one course there that explicitly mixes analog and digital techniques. It's called like mixed media, digital and analog. And that's exactly what it is. And I've been active with trying to bring in things like large format printers and laser cutters and other things we can use. So it's a way to kind of like yeah, tie. I guess it's funny as I'm talking, I'm like, oh right, I've done that. Yeah, so that's the most explicit, and that's that's been a good thing to kind of like see where the research, if you will, in the studio can be, a way to generate ideas for the students.
I wish teachers had been more explicit about creating something, wanting to create something of value. I had one teacher, a seminar in grad school. She didn't really care. She just gave us all A's, whatever. She didn't really care. She wasn't about the grades at all. It was just, she wanted us to show up and be invested in the projects that we were doing or talking about or whatever we were all in grad school. So everybody was pretty much invested in what they were presenting anyway. But she was very explicit and like, I want you to be able to use this.
Hmm.
I wanted this to be useful for you.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then I started thinking about it differently. Have you seen the show A Brief History of the Future? It was a PBS six-part documentary. It released came out last year on PBS, and it's completely worth watching. Every episode is a different huge topic. One is AI, another one is climate change, education. Each episode is another big issue, but the one on education was sort of looking at some of the issues with the system, and that it talked about how it was started to create workers for assembly lines during the Industrial Revolution. This was like a product of of the new like industrial age. Even the bell, if you think about the way that you show up, it's all about compliance. You show up, do the work, the bell rings, you go to the next class, just
Sure.
like an assembly line worker. But
Yeah.
they have these experimental schools in like Abu Dhabi or wherever it is. I'm sure they have other places as well, but that focus on students pursuing what they're interested in. They have seminars, they have one-on-one time with teachers, they have a lot of time for their own independent study and so forth. And just the way that we think about education, I think, has to shift to make more sense in the world we're living in.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I was just talking with Son about this morning. I feel, and this, I'm cautious of my own optimism always. That's one of my things. But I feel cautiously optimistic that like, even though I don't expect most of my students will go on to be artists, that spending some time doing artistic training will actually have more value in our at least our foreseeable future than maybe it has in a long time. Just because I think, again, this is we'll see how this prediction ages, right? But like I get the sense that like more, yeah, rote informational type skills are going to be pretty rapidly devalued, and the ability to like think through visual communication or to synthesize disparate things into something new is it's going to have value because those are things that are harder to train on a language model and harder to kind of like, I think that like one of the not that I'm very I'm very cautious to say much about AI because it's such an over talk topic, but I do suspect there's going to be a real mismatch between people's desire for art experiences and what AI can produce. I could be wrong, but I think people want something where they get a sense of a human to human transmission. And so anything that I think is intelligent in that area, is probably a valuable skill. Just thinking about any form of communication that's visual, any form of problem solving that's visual. Yeah. Yeah, check back. But at the moment, it's like, oh, maybe this is more useful than it has been previously, just as a sort of part of the brain to light up for young people.
If we continue to do the way things we're doing and with language models, how sophisticated they are, with a book report, it'd be ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like if you want to learn that, you'll learn it. But I think it is about creative synthesis now.
Hmm.
I think that's a good way to put it. It does seem to be more important than ever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good thing to remember for next semester.
I went to the cloisters last weekend and saw the Robert Campin. Do you know the Marode altarpiece, that
I've never
triptych?
been to the cloisters. I've really got to.
What?
I know. Son and I were just talking about have we never been to the cloisters?
Go in the summer. It's beautiful. They have the
Okay.
courtyard open and there's wildflowers and there's
Okay.
just being there is a real treat. But they have this one painting, the best painting there, in my opinion, is this Robert Campin. It's a triptych, Northern Renaissance, Flemish, 15th century, and it's so sophisticated, so beautifully painted. It was like right when oil painting first came out. I mean, it's like a mic drop almost. You're just like, what? Like everything is so meticulous. Everything is. There's not a bad moment in that painting.
Yeah. Well, it's weirdly photographic in a way, right? One of the things I like about photography is the excess of information. There is like this alien quality to it because it doesn't differentiate the way human perception does. And there's this kind of sense of it like, yeah, like there's this sense of it like capturing more than you can actually see, because you can
Yes.
never focus in the way that a camera does. And so like there's something surreal about that I've always been into. But those paintings have a little bit of that quality. They're when you talk about different worldview, they're not about getting perception right. They're about mapping the world, right? They're like, there are all these flowers. We have to articulate them to make them real in this world.
I'm really glad you say that because I just recently had a conversation with Clinton King. Do you know the painter?
Yeah.
And he was talking about that very same quality. He went to Belgium and he saw these Van Eyck's. He did see the Ghent altarpiece, and he was talking about the clarity, but it's even different from a photograph. I guess it's closer to a photograph than the eye because you would still, it's clear everywhere. It's equally
Right.
clear and equally rendered, and that you said it has a surreal quality. He was talking about having a psychedelic quality,
Yeah.
and there is something really strange and uncanny about this sensation that creates when everything is equally clear in an image.
Yeah. Well, the psychedelic element, as I understand it, is what happens where it breaks down your figure ground relationships and your hierarchies, right? Where you're just like in an undifferentiated field. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, some version of it. You're no longer separating things out the way you typically do. It's like, that's what I want to look at. This is all boring background. That's the food I want to eat. It becomes all equally valid. And that's like, it's a form of perception that is I don't know how to put it. Like, I don't know if it's alien or other than how we're generally conditioned to be in the world, right? We're generally conditioned to have a subject and a goal, and the rest fades out in order to accomplish that, getting my glasses or having a bite of food. So like, yeah, so there's something in that way of seeing that is psychedelic, that is like God's eye. It's sort of and it is Buddhist, of course, like undifferentiated think, undivided reality. You're not sort of
It's not
separating out.
non-hierarchical.
Not hierarchical, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ethan, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I greatly appreciate your meeting today. Is
Yeah.
there anything you want to add before we go?
Well, sure, I'll think of it right after I hang up. But no, this was great. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, thank you
Awesome.
for having
Thank you again.